Welcome everyone to pontosfathom podcast number 19. Our topic today is the anime manga Bleach and Anthroposophy. And today what we're going to do is look at works of Rudolph Steiner, especially his outline of occult science and some of the insights he has about higher worlds, the nature of the soul, nature of different planets, the way he talks about planets, but also how that kind of fits in with the architecture and the soul dynamics and some, let's call it the mechanisms or the world rules of the Bleach universe. And I thought some of that seemed really interesting. I kind of wanted to get into that. So for people who don't know either, Bleach, very popular anime from early 2000s, and looking to have somewhat of a resurgence soon as they're going to finish off, not only finish off some of the anime that the manga had completed, but it looks like they're actually going to take the manga a next step forward with what looks like it's going to be a hell arc. There's recently been a light novel series that's come out that I'm in the process of reading here. I've just made it into the first one, Can't Fear Your Own World, which is sort of wrapping up some of the loose ends. And there's been recently some new insights from a additional Hell Arc chapter where we see that some of the characters from the Soul Society are now down in Hell. So looks like a new exciting start for Bleach. Rudolph Steiner, very involved with Madame Blavatsky's Theosophy, and then branched off to form his own Anthroposophy, which is a offshoot of sort of a spiritual science, spiritual inquiry. But also Steiner's very much interested in the Waldorf school and very interested in the path forward, let's say, for humanity, and that hence in the name Anthroposophy. And I would like to parallel that with some works of Moldenhauer, Balsamo, just talk about some interesting features of the Bleach universe in the architecture of the Bleach universe. So the way the different realms work, we'll kind of go into that a little bit. And we'll go into a little bit on the sort of the mechanics of the Bleach universe, how souls work, how there's things like mod souls and gigais, and how there's some Ahrimanic overlap with those things. And finally, we'll take a look at just the nature of how some of the different factions correspond to some lessons that we see Steiner highlighting in his works. So maybe we'll just do a quick jump into the outline of occult sciences. And the one that I've got first is, and maybe we'll juxtapose this. We'll start off with a little intro in occult science, but then I kind of want to start off with Kisuke Urahara, right? So Kisuke Urahara is an interesting character from the Bleach saga, and we'll kind of focus from Urahara's perspective, and I'll kind of share that with people who aren't familiar with the lore. And then people who are familiar with the lore will know exactly what I'm talking about when I get to it. So let's start off with occult science. I just wanted to start out with this. It says, the form and shape to the physical body of man. So we talk about sleep and death in this section, right? So I just wanted to sort of jump into this idea of the astral body. So one of the things we learned early on in Bleach was there's the world of humans, right? So in the world of Bleach, there's the world of humans. And when a human dies, their soul it leaves their body in the Bleach universe. Now, some souls stay behind on the earth, and they become something what they call hollows. So it's a soul that's been detached from its body, but is not yet passed on to heaven, let's say. And there's this role of these soul reapers, they're called the Shinigami. And the Shinigami are sort of squads of soul reapers, and one of their tasks is to usher the souls to heaven through this kanso. Now, there's some overlaps with Christian. Obviously, Bleach is a Japanese property, so there's some more resonance with some mythology there. But one thing that's very interesting is when the hollows are stuck behind, they can grow in power by eating other souls or other ghosts. And as those hollows eat each other and grow upon each other, they end up becoming these monstrous creatures, hollows and Manos Grande, and then eventually into these things like Arankar, which are even more frightful versions. And so then you have the economy of soul reapers in heaven, kind of like angels in a way, but different than angels, but some overlaps here. So let's kind of get into it. So Steiner says, the form and shape proper to the physical body of man can only be maintained by means of a human etheric body, which in its turn must be endowed with the appropriate forces by the astral body. The ether body is the form-giving agent or architect of the physical, but it can only form the physical body aright if it receives from the astral body the necessary guidance and stimulation. In the astral body, the pattern forms or archetypes, according to the etheric body, now gives the physical its appointed shape. And it says, the astral body fulfills its waking function within the physical body. Its sleep in works from the latter without. Just as the physical body in the supply of nourishment, for example, has the need of the outer world to which it is akin, a similar thing is true of the astral body. Imagine a human physical body taken right away from its appropriate surroundings. It would eventually perish. The physical body's existence is impossible without the entire physical environment. So here we have this strange idea, right? We have this idea of the body as a vessel of the spirit body, and the body requires its nourishment, and the spirit body requires its nourishment. So when so let's go to the Bleach universe. When the soul leaves, the soul would naturally go to heaven, but sometimes a fearful soul or like a ghost might stay behind. And this is where the Shinigami role comes in. So when our story opens up very early on in the Bleach saga, we have our main hero, Ichigo Kurosaki. He can see ghosts. And we have these cases of, for example, where Ichigo sees a ghost that won't leave and continues to sort of haunt his sister. But Ichigo can see this hollowed out chest hole, and he's sort of lost his... It's sort of interesting because the hollow loses touch with its humanity. And you can see that Ichigo is fighting this hollow here. And eventually there's a whole network of different kinds of threats like this. Ichigo's parents, mother in fact, was killed by a hollow early on. And then he gets these soul reaper powers. And then he transforms into not just someone who can see ghosts, but someone who can actually pass the ghosts and fight these creatures. And this leads into a very vast storyline in Bleach. But one of the characters of Bleach is Kisuke Urahara. So Urahara is, in a ways like Steiner. He's interested in soul science. And he's interested, like Steiner was talking about, the container of the soul. The body's the container of the soul. The soul nourishes the body. Nourishment nourishes body, but what nourishes the soul, right? So Urahara gets involved with looking at ways to create these things called gigais, right? A gigai is like a container, a body for an artificial soul or a mod soul. So you can see that there's something very strange going on in the Bleach mythology. It's like the idea of a not real soul, and they end up being cute little characters like stuffed animals with a magical candy inside of them that can run around and talk. But what's interesting about it is this sounds a lot like artificial intelligence, right? So if we take a look at Steiner, we keep going down this rabbit hole. We see a reflection of this inner soul condition of man could be seen in the external bodily form, the parts which contain the beginning of what afterwards formed the head were evolved. The remaining organs would appear only as appendages and were shadow-like and indistinct, but not all Earthmen were alike in their form and figures. The appendages, more or less, with variation depending on dwelling on the Earth. Others had not been ready for contact with the elements, the spirit of air and the spirit of fire, and the light effects, the archangels. There was, in addition to this, a third kind of human being, still more deeply entangled in earthly existence. These had not been able to touch by the fire element, and they've received the element of water. So here's just sort of Steiner talking about the elements and influences of different planets on the forms. It says, on Earth had developed the air element within it, the relics of the old moon, who had remained further back in evolution with these lowest of human souls. These became the souls and the forms that have deserted by man and had separated from the sun, and were the forefathers of the animal kingdom. They evolved especially the organs and appendages. These astral bodies were the case with man on the old moon. So this is interesting how there's these animals on the old moon in Steiner's Occult Science. So later in the Bleach saga, we find that, so just like Urahara had experimented with these gigais and artificial souls, they also looked at artificial hollows and making... Urahara's experiment, I think, originally was something like to give the lost souls a temporary body to live in, so they could be free to move about on their way toward their heavenly redemption. But there was, let's say, forces of those hollows which were cannibalistic, and they ended up creating a higher form of a hollow. And those hollows of the higher form were called Menos Grande, and eventually they became monstrous. Like this is one of these Arankar Espada. This one is Ulquiorra. So the idea is, as these souls of the hollows became more powerful, their disconnection from their former humanity was so far that they've now become something totally different. So these are like the fallen souls. And just like Steiner talks about the old moon, these Arankar and these sort of like advanced hollows, they lived in a place called Hueco Mundo, which is very moon-like also. So it does have a moon vibe to it. I want to keep going into this area because I think that the cannibalistic nature of the hollows, so the hollows found much of their power through a kind of cannibalism. And it was basically by devouring more and more souls, they ended up consolidating their power. And so this is where Urahara comes in. But there was another villain of the series who was doing experiments with what they called hollows, hollowification experiments. So this is where they would purposefully take a living person and hollowify. And here you can see some hollows. Here's the pictures of some hollows. They would hollowify these characters, and they created these visors, sort of a hybrid of a human or a soul reaper hybrid with a hollow. And it was sort of this strange, tortured experiment where it's a cross between an angel and a demon. Think of it this way, a cross between an angelic and a demonic character. And it has very Ahrimanic flavor to it. You can see in... there's one character called Grimjow, and they kind of show this character of Grimjow and how it started out as a hollow, but then it became an animal-like creature, right? So just like Steiner was talking about these souls of animals from the old moon. Well, on Hueco Mundo, these more powerful hollows would evolve into smaller groups of advanced monsters, and they would hunt in packs for more souls, and they would continue to consume the souls, right? And I think that this is a very Ahrimanic kind of vision. If we look at the Ahrimanic view of this, there is only one of the forces of corruption poured by Ahriman into human souls, another means of temptation connected with his incarnation. He was also working in cooperation with the Luciferic forces. Another of his endeavors is to preserve the already widespread attitude that for the public welfare is sufficient for the economic and material needs of humanity. However, we point not willingly faced to modern life, official science nowadays contributes nothing to real knowledge of the soul and the spirit. At the heart, they are always asking, what is the good of it? How can it help me acquire the world's goods? But now think of the consequences of this. What numbers of people are there today who no longer value the spirit for the sake of the spirit for the sake of the spirit, or the soul for the sake of the soul? They are out to absorb from cultural life only what is regarded as useful. This is a significant and mysterious factor in the light that modern humanity must be lifted to the full light of consciousness. So again, this is a bit like an anthroposophical view of Bleach's architecture. So let's talk a little bit about that architecture, right? You've got the humans, and you've got the human souls that can become hollows, right? So the soul can become a hollow, and the hollows can feed off them, they can evolve off, and eventually they live in Hueco Mundo, which is like a purgatory, moon-like place to it. The Soul Society, the Serete, this is much akin to, it's not quite like a heaven, but it's more like an Elysium or an afterlife. There's a hierarchy, there's a soul king, there's the 13 guards of this society, and then they have areas like the Rukon district in the Soul Society where the normal souls that have passed on live. And from there's also a concept perhaps of a heaven, and there's also a concept perhaps of a hell. So the fallen souls that need to be punished for, say, horrible life in their existence would go down to hell. And we've seen some indications that this hell arc may have some implications on the architecture of Kubo's space, right? So let's keep going, though. It says, in the connection, people today have succumbed to this strange fallacy. They do not believe that the spirit can be eaten. And yet the very ones who say this do eat the spirit. Although they refuse to accept anything spiritual, nevertheless, every morsel that passes through their mouths into their stomachs, they are devouring the spirit, but dispatching it along the path and the other paths which lead to the real well-being of mankind. So here we have kind of an interesting thing, the idea of consuming spirit, and we even have the Christian version of this is, the transubstantiation. And in Kubo's Bleach universe, they have this idea of reishi, which is the spiritual energy. So the Shinigami draw their powers from reishi. And the hollows also have reishi. So this is like that spiritual energy where they can direct this and fight with it and get stronger and whatnot. So this imbuing of spirit into not only physical bodies, a physical body eats an orange, it's the sun, right? But a spirit body can have a spiritual sustenance, this reishi sustenance. And the accumulation of this, the build-up of the spiritual pressure can create these higher angelic beings. So we can think of Angel Michael as a higher being, perhaps like a soul reaper in a way. These angelic figures, it says, if we understand how to penetrate more deeply into the supersensible evolution, which lies behind our sense evolution, we are actually able to perceive at some point how an archangel ascends to the nature of the arche, and an angel being to an archangel being. Right? So this idea of the evolution, the powering up, right? This is deep embedded into religions, how one can power up, and it's very much a theme throughout many shonen books where characters power up and they become more powerful. So let's take a pause here and go back to the idea of occult science, right? So Steiner's saying here, the occult science is in fact influenced perhaps by a couple of forces. There's the mysteries. So, for example, Atlantis and the hidden nature of the mystery. So human life goes on in the Bleach world, and we are not aware of these other forces going on in the Soul Society and how this inner workings go. And even in the Soul Society, they're not actually aware of the inner workings of how the Soul King works, or all the mechanisms of how the Arankar work. Or even, for example, there's another group called the Quincy that comes in. The Quincy, another race, another form of spiritual beings that are at odds with the Shinigami. And this is kind of like Steiner's planets, right? So, or different mystery schools like the Eastern Mysteries and the Southern Mysteries or something like this. So we'll go here into that. Others there were who, though they had not lost their old clairvoyance, developed the new faculties in relation to the physical world with inner feelings and emotions that correspond to the experience of clairvoyance. And besides all this, the Atlantean oracles also had their successors. The centers of the mysteries were found on every hand. The initiation secret chiefly developed in these centers was the kind that leads to the revelation that the spiritual world which Ahriman keeps hidden. See, Ahriman has keeping things hidden. These mythologies also contain other secrets, though in less perfect form, from either the southern or the eastern mysteries. The superhuman beings were known in Europe too, but they were seen in perpetual war with the associates of Lucifer, the god of light. So you see the idea of the Atlantean epoch, the mystery schools, and the different superhuman beings, they all kind of seem to make their way out into Bleach mythology, right? So in the Bleach mythology, the next place to go is we can talk about some of the mechanisms. We talked about the mechanism of soul, but let's talk about some of the different modalities of these different groups. And as we mentioned, there's these 13 court guards in the Serete. And you have at the former head of the 12th court guard, Kisake Urahara, transforms his division, the 12th division, into the research division. So here we're like, as I was saying earlier, Rudolph Steiner probing into occult science. Kisuke Urahara probing into occult science. What's one of the things that Urahara experiments with? Gigais, artificial beings, containers to put souls into. And we go into the idea of desiring machines, impedance and admittance in desiring machines. So here the concept is, again, a machine acquires intelligence, a container for a soul, right? So when the soul reapers come to Earth, they don't have a body. But Urahara could provide them with a gigai, which is a artificial body that a soul can be placed into, and then they can be visible in the world. So the idea, it's like giving the ghost a home. But it's not a ghost in the machine, it's ghost in a biological machine. And then that kind of gets very close to the idea of this human automaton, right? So there's a little bit of confusion there in the research world between, you know, what's a real person, what's a synthetic body, what's a synthetic body with a real soul, what's an artificial soul, like an artificial intelligence, right? A desiring machine. And I think Cone is the comic relief of this. Cone is like I said, there's a plush toy. Maybe there's a picture of him here on the cover of the book. Ichigo has it's a small lion. It's a small lion that is animated. It's something like this. This is not him, but this is just some cartoonish thing. It says Soul Society. The first to conduct whole souls to Soul Society means of Kanso, which is my mission, to vaporize hollows. We call hollows. Hollows attack the living and the dead indiscriminately and devour their souls. The hollows are evil spirits. So the soul reapers have two principal duties. One of them is to pass the Kanso, the other one is to kill the hollows. So, and this goes into a bit of that necromancy space too. So the idea here is There's the idea of the dying and rising gods. The Shinigami are alive, but they're dead. The souls are having various grades and shapes, and I think this is kind of akin to this Ahrimanic idea of the eighth sphere, right? Or the idea of it's an attractor for the souls to move forward to. So let's go to Steiner again, and he says, the phase of evolution beginning with our own time has had a very special characteristic. Just think what effect could be of knowledge such that the future incarnation of Ahriman, who is preparing it by means I have described both yesterday and today, it is essential to inform ourselves objectively about these things in order that we may take the right stand toward what is going on around us in preparation for the Ahrimanic incarnation. If you apply deep and mature reflection to what has been said in these lectures, the Ahrimanic currents, you will be able to apprehend the gravity of the present situation. So, anthroposophically, he divides the class into two. Subjectively, this might not be altogether welcome, for I may want to prove it to be a rod for our own backs. But if we do not want to speak, I want to show that there is a longing for progress in human beings, but that they are asleep and do not perceive the forces that are keeping these longings in subjugation. So I think that we have that in the early Bleach stories. We'll have Ichigo's high school friends that can't see the hollows, but Ichigo, because he's become a soul reaper, he can see it. So he's been awakened by the sort of occult science. And also interesting to just talk about the idea that the Ahrimanic challenge eventually leads us to characters, again, similar characters throughout Bleach. Ulquiorra is one of these espada, or these advanced hollows that are very, very demonic, let's call them. But then also characters that want to overturn the cosmic order, right? So if you think in Steiner's terms, he would talk about something like the Golgotha mystery, right? So you have a Luciferian and Ahrimanic forces, and then you have a knight, something like Michael the Archangel, who stands at the gates to defend that. And this is where Ichigo has that role of the protector of his friends, but also protector of the worlds and the protector of the architecture of the worlds, right? And Urahara ends up on this kind of side of right too. He is the occult scientist, in a way, who's doing the research, not for nefarious purposes. You know, there's nefarious characters, whether it's Aizen with his Hokyoku, or Kurotsuchi and his experiments against the Quincy, for example, or his treatment of his own squad, and he's more of a mad scientist. Where Urahara is a mad scientist, but he's kind of like a mad scientist with a heart or with a plan. And in the end, the idea of it is this occult science is looking beyond the spaces that we can see with our human senses and activating those spiritual senses. And so that maybe we'll end on the concept of this, because in Bleach, there are a couple of characters that have these innate abilities, and they come out very early in the series. For example, the brother and sister of Ichigo, they have some spiritual sense, especially one of his sisters has a very clear sense of when the hollows are present. Chad, his human friend, he has this spiritual sensitivity. He can tell when the evil spirits are present, and he actually can physically punch them, right? So you get this concept of all of his friends have some spiritual sensitivity. So again, in the occult science of things, and in the kind of Urahara sense, Urahara is running his candy shop on the earth. He's an exiled Shinigami. He's an exiled soul reaper. And you have something like Steiner building his Gotarium, starting his Waldorf school, something like this. The idea of how do we transmit this knowledge to people. So yeah, lots of interesting things in the world building of Bleach that I kind of wanted to jump into. Hope it was a bit interesting for everyone. Leave comments below. I read the comments. you know, as I've mentioned before in other podcasts, I'd like to turn this into a live chat where we can talk live, but need to build the channel still. So if some of these topics were interesting, leave me a note below. I read all the topics. There are so many things we can talk about here. And in my research this month on anthroposophy and reading through the works of Steiner, we've done another podcast where we similarly looked at the works of Dune. And we did that one last week. Next up, we're going to deep dive, we touched on it a bit today, but we're going to deep dive on Ahriman and artificial intelligence and look at the anthroposophy of artificial intelligence. But you can see from the vector we've even explored here with this anime world, the world building that goes on in the human imagination. It's very profound and it's very spiritually influenced, right? So there's a spectrum, as we always talk about here, between imagination and clairvoyance, or imagination and spiritual sense, let's say. And it's interesting to see those archetypes emerge. You know, we've done a lot of podcasts here talking about Jungian archetypes and Lacanian language, right? And with a character like Urahara, who is the exiled researcher with a heart, and he's also the smart guy who has to bear the burden of the challenge. I think Steiner was a figure like this, and Steiner's admonishment or warning he gives is that those type of characters will have to face this Ahrimanic age, this kind of Kali Yuga age. Those people will be put to the test. So leave a message below. Let me know what you think. A little bit of fun here, mixing anthroposophy with Bleach, touching on some interesting topics. Hope you guys found it interesting. We'll read the comments. If you like and subscribe, if I'm so lucky to earn your subscription, that can help us with the algorithm, build up the page. Otherwise, check out our links in the bookstore. Can support our channel that way. Really appreciate your guys' attention, listening, and time. Talk to you soon. Thanks a lot for being here. Bye-bye.